point that you made about the disconnect that people make between the local and the global. And the councils have actually, in the month of March, through Angus Reid, we collaborated to do a national poll across the country in which there were about 1,200 participants on the ranking of international development as an issue of concern. And one of the questions was, do you think that global poverty is increasing, remaining the same, or decreasing? And 59% said that they thought global poverty was increasing. Now the reality is that global poverty is actually decreasing. And so it just kind of made me think that, you know, when you talk about all of these issues that are happening in our context today, there is still that whole issue of how do Canadians participate as global citizens. And in spite of the challenges that we're currently having in this particular milieu, there is a lot that we can do in what may otherwise seem like a really challenging context.
In terms of, say, dollar spent in percentage, isn't it that most of the money goes for, is spent on services? That we are essentially service NGOs and not rights NGOs. Isn't it true?
Yes, no, it is certainly the case, and it is increasingly the case as more and more governments look for short-term results. So more and more governments are inclined to skew more of their aid budgets to humanitarian responses. And more governments instrumentalize NGOs, so they see us as an efficient delivery mechanism, but not the most efficient, right? Increasingly, we find ourselves competing with Blackwater and other corporations that actually are, you know, skimming 80% off the top, so that in terms of any rational understanding of efficiency, they don't meet those criteria. But we have an increasing, the jargon term is securitization of our aid programs, right? So more and more of our aid program is focused in, you know, Canada's aid priorities were Afghanistan, right? And then Haiti, and then whoever else, right? And more of the world's aid is focused on fragile states, and that gives them both the reason and the excuse for not going through state structures and devaluing the role of civil society in those responses. Because they, well, it's a fragile state, what can you expect, right?
So what I was going to ask you is, apart from getting ready for the next federal election, which we all should be doing, by the way, what do you recommend we do?
A meeting I'm missing on Friday because I'm going to PEI in Ottawa is a meeting of Voices. Some of you will have heard about Voices. It's a coalition of a couple hundred organizations that are human rights organizations, human rights defenders organizations, groups concerned about democracy. It is trying to pull together sort of a bigger picture of and make the connections, and people, I think, need to find opportunities to do that. You know, something that pulls together the reality that we're all, as I say, experiencing our the different face of this dynamic, but we need to draw the big picture. How we actually articulate a national strategy and a national campaign and a national organization that mobilizes Canadians to defend their rights and to make connections and to acknowledge the importance of elections. You know, I look to movements like Voices that brings people together. I look to citizens as consumers, as taxpayers, as electors, and as people within their own community and solidarity with other people in their community as being critical. So in this community, I encourage you to figure out, you know, is the banner that brings us together defend CIDA's budget, or is it deal with the pipelines? We've been working as Oxfam on a global campaign, the GROW campaign, that brings together issues of food justice, climate justice, and gender justice. There's huge interest and energy around that, and we see a lot of people who say that's a helpful prism within which to be challenging, you know, in whose interest is this world operating, and how can we, what's our point of entry? I say there's different points of entry. I think that each community has to sort of figure out where its point of entry is, and each individual has to do that to some extent. I see lots of energy and lots of bubbling frustration, and the challenge that we have collectively is to figure out what's the process that will weave that into you know, a coherent plan of action But in the interim, you know, I'm not encouraging anyone to wait until, you know, you get the email with this is the plan. You know, this is a co-creation. We need to take this action ourselves, individually and collectively, and we need to start and do what we can concretely today, while we're waiting to understand better how that all meshes, right? But for those of us who are already very much involved, the challenge is the knitting. It is figuring out how we can create spaces for common cause with other people who are under attack. And for those who are less involved, it may be your leadership, in fact, that we've been lacking. And if you step up to that challenge, you'll give us the clarity of vision and strategy that we've been calling for.